Good evening and welcome to Metrofocus. I'm Jenna Flannigan. In the wake of New Zealand's tragic shooting at Christchurch Mosque, faith leaders across the globe are speaking out even more against gun violence plaguing their communities. And in an effort to save lives, many denominations of faith-based groups are coming together to not only find new solutions, but to get to the root of hate. Among those leaders, Bernstein, the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League, and Pastor Gil Monrose, president of the 67th Precinct Clergy Council, better known as the God Squad, are working to make the borough of Brooklyn safer. Although from different respective faiths, they teamed up to speak at the Clergy Gun Violence Prevention Summit. And I'd like to welcome, gentlemen, both of you to the program. First, tell us about this summit and what was it that took place?
I'll let Pastor take it.
So, thank you for having me. So the summit was really looking at best practices for faith leaders to reduce gun violence. Normally when you talk about faith leaders and gun violence, there is not a direct correlation between what exactly faith leaders can do to reduce gun violence. And so for over the past 10 years, myself and the God Squad in East Flatbush have been working on specific ways in how we reduce the violence. So we took 10 years of experience, put it into a few hours, and dispatch it to and release it to faith leaders from around the city.
What does 10 years of experience look like when it's been condensed?
A little bit of gray hair, 25 funerals, multiple shooting responses on the street, a lot of visiting hospitals, comforting families, working on the street with areas which we call hotspots, where we know for sure that the gang members are either beefing with one another. It calls for us cutting hair for young children going back to school, being role models in our communities. It calls for the faith leaders to really take an active approach with praying with our feet, which means that we must do the work on the street level.
Okay. So, Evan, we've had you on the show several times to talk about tragedies that have happened. And usually our conversations tend to be more macro about, what the larger issue of what's going on. Whereas what I'm hearing the Reverend describe is much more micro, individual, and on the street. So how does the ADL fit into this?
It comes down to personal relationships, and I got to know Pastor Monrose, a few years ago around his work at Brooklyn Borough Hall with Eric Adams and working with faith-based institutions and security, and we have a great relationship with the NYPD and the FBI, and we were able to partner on that. And from that partnership became a friendship and a real conversation about the respective works that we do. And through those conversations, learning about what the God Squad is doing and how important it is. And as a civil rights organization, gun violence is something that the ADL has taken a stance on. We have a robust platform on gun reform. And we believe, that there needs to be more work done there. And this, to me, was a natural marriage for us to be able to help. We're not on the ground. We are a macro organization to a certain extent. But to be able to help Pastor Monrose in his mission was a way, I think, for us to understand what was going on in the community. I had totally different kinds of thoughts on what the ADL could do to help in the community, like anti-bias work, everything else. But when I learned about gun violence, it was an opportunity, I think, for us to start standing together. And we went to Israel together last year, and I learned even more from the congregants that were members of his church and other churches in Brooklyn. And it just more and more solidified us wanting to help the God Squad and do the work with preventing gun violence in New York.
So when it comes to some of the work that you're doing, we mentioned sort of at the beginning of the piece, getting to the root of hate.
Right.
And it sounds more like what you're getting to the root of is more of inequity, inequality, some of the social issues that can plague some of the poorer communities that are suffering some of the gun violence issues. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you look at Central Brooklyn, if you look at Crown Heights, when you look at anti-Semitism in those areas as well, even though I don't equate poverty with violence, I do know that there is a direct link between the resources that we see in our communities and the violence that we see. So I think that over and over again, what we need to always remember is that hate is a human condition across the board, and rich, poor, in between. And so the work that we do is that we try to make sure that we try to meet specifically those individuals where they are in the community and figure out ways how do we help them up and to give them a hand up into the situation. So for instance, we don't tell gang members to leave gangs. What we try to do is give them resources to make their own decisions in terms of how they want to live their life. But the importance is that we must be at the place where they are to give them the opportunities in which they need.
Well, not to pivot too far away from Brooklyn, of course, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your recent trip to Poland, speaking of opening up lines of communication and having those conversations. First of all, tell us why you were all the way in Poland, and what was it that trip, what was the purpose?
So when we went to Israel together, and we spent time at Yad Vashem with a lot of the congregants on these 7 buses that Pastor Monrose put together to go to Israel. And I realized that there wasn't a tremendous knowledge of the history of the Jewish people, and a lot of the knowledge they had of the Holocaust was really defined between 1939 and 1945, and it was one kind of brief experience at an amazing museum, but still a museum. And as things kind of ramped up over the last 6-8 months in Brooklyn, and we saw more and more assaults taking place, I was trying to think of a way as an organization that's not situated locally in Brooklyn, how can we get people to understand and start talking and having conversations? And the first thing that came to my mind was people need to go to Poland, they need to go to Auschwitz, they need to experience Birkenau, they need to see where the Warsaw Ghetto was. And my idea was if someone could experience that, maybe it would help them be able to communicate, kind of the Jewish story in a different way and have a different perspective. And the first person I thought of was bringing my friend Pastor Monrose, who would give me an honest opinion on the trip of whether or not this would be something that is worth, continuing, and is it going to have impact. And I think based on everything that we've discussed during and post-trip, it's something that we want to continue, and we think it has a lot of merit to help continue conversations.
And Pastor Monrose, what was your take on that trip?
So one of the things I always say to Evan is that, a lot of times community call us to help and stand on their issues. And I said to him, you have to also help us stand on our issues as well. To have great partnership, you have to know where you come from and understand our pain and our suffering. You have to understand our community and our neighborhoods. You have to understand what we deal with every single day, so that when you call me to stand with you, I also need to understand where you're coming from, your pain, your suffering, and your history. And I think that we are bonded by our past. We're also connected with our present, and we're going to be connected with our future. So for me, going to Poland, I think that a lot of the places that we have been to, the history that we saw, we felt, so it helps me position myself to speak clearly and kind of understand in a deeper sense what the Jewish community is going through, so that when I speak, I can speak from a standpoint of knowledge, empathy, but also from experience as well.
Well, I think it's beautiful that you guys have created this line of communication. Even though we are this incredibly multicultural city, we somehow can manage to live in our separate bubbles. And so the more communication and understanding that we can have of each other's experiences and lives, I would hope that would definitely be able to change some of the violent outcomes that we've seen. So
I hope so.
Thank you both for joining us on the program.
No, thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
And of course, Evan, we'll have you back again, and Pastor Monrose, we'd love to have you on as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.